I think they knew that I had given my blood and my every milliliter of my sweat trying to make it work. But I guess I just wasn't clever enough to come up with something that would really blow everybody away and be something completely different.
It was just set up wrong to begin with.
It was a very sort of bad period for us, all this film, because we were fighting a losing battle all the time.
People get more conservative, costs get greater, the studio gets scared that they're not going to make as much money, and you better do every little beat that was in the first two because they know they work, but of course the audience is ahead of you if you do that.
Well, Alien³ everybody wanted to make the sequel to Alien, kind of except us. We weren't so, I mean, we were happy to do it, but we weren't all that enthused. Because we thought, you know, what do you do with this one to make it different? You know, the whole idea you can't do something that's just going to be a reheat of one or two.
We knew we wanted to carry the company's duplicity and need for this weapon further. And we wanted to find an environment that was rich and ominous. At first we thought about a scientific way station in space where sort of covert experimentation was going to go on. And subsequently we thought about making it Alcatraz in space.
We went through a series of writers and a series, you know, some directors, and, you know, we talked to Ridley about doing it. We talked, you know, to, I think, who was Rennie Harlan, somebody we'd actually hired at one point.
When I signed on to do Alien³ my first principle was that I'm not going to copy Ridley Scott or Jim Cameron. They are fantastic filmmakers, and I felt that if I could bring something new into the series, then it was really worth doing. And it wasn't just a movie that is just a sequel, but it was really a movie on its own, taking all the great heritage from its predecessors. My original approach was that we would go to where the aliens actually come from. We would place the story on the planet where they really originate from and really explain what they are. And maybe they are not born to be bad at all.
We talked about the Planet of the Aliens because it just cost too much money in those days. Now you could do. I'd like to see Ridley do that. That would be good.
Other concepts that were floating around in those days were also the idea of the aliens coming to Earth.
On Earth, everyone can hear you scream.
I think the first version that we had was a version that was based on work that Walter Hill and David Giler had done with William Gibson. The next writer after that who was involved was Eric Red, who did The Hitcher, and there was also this concept of a prison ship where the aliens end up. Eric worked on a version of this prison ship, and I wasn't that crazy about that concept because I just wanted to get out there to the planet, and I was afraid that there was just no way around the fact that we are going to end up in a similar kind of an environment with lots of corridors and lots of bulkheads and doorways and the kind of things that we've seen before. And then also David Twohy was involved.
His has prisoners on it. His is a prisoner's being shipped off into space to a planet. You follow the guy who is the prisoner being shipped off.
There was also talk about not necessarily having Sigourney Weaver involved in Alien 3.
Yes, I mean there was a question of whether she wanted to do a third one. There was always that lingering question from those, since no women turned out for Alien 2 either, so there was a question of couldn't we try to develop a male action hero for the franchise? So we were going to try to do that. None of this came to pass, of course.
First of all, I found out I wasn't going to be in the movie. Okay, I mean, I heard it through my agent or whatever. That you're not.
Are we gonna sleep all the way home?
All the way home.
Can I dream?
Yes, honey. I think we both can.
I believe that when you are doing a sequel and you're part of the series, that you do want to give the audience, in a certain way, you want to give them the same kind of an experience. They expect to see aliens, and they expect to see the heroine and certain type of situations. So I do believe that you want to give that satisfaction, but at the same time, I do believe that your job is to invent something new and offer the audience something new, because otherwise you're just rehashing what people before you did. So that was always my goal, and ultimately the reason why I had to make the hard decision and go to Walter Hill and say, Walter, I'm really sorry. I think I've been working on this for a year, and we've done illustrations and we've worked on all these storylines, but I really feel like somehow we keep circling the same premise, and for me it's not different enough from what the audience has seen before, and I just can't get excited about the idea of just having more guns and more aliens.
There were lots of versions, none of which were particularly successful, we thought. And then we hired Vincent Ward. We saw The Navigator. And when he came in and talked about it, it was definitely different. This was going to be a whole new, notion of Alien.
I got the call to come to LA, got the offer to direct Alien 3. I told them I wasn't interested in sequels. By the third phone call, I thought, well, I might as well give it a shot. I looked at the script they'd sent me. I didn't like it. I thought it was just the standard sci-fi stuff that you expect, all the gadgetry and so on. But I had a tiny idea, and on the plane over, in my imagination, I expanded it into a story. So by the time I got to LA, I sat in with the head of the studio, I sat in with my studio executive, and with the producers, and I pitched this story to them. And really to my surprise, because I just wanted to get out of Australia for a break, they really liked it.
And then we were really gearing up to make the movie. They were really talking about making this movie. And Sigourney met with them, and she was happy with them. And everybody was pleased, and this was all going forward.
Very shortly after writing the story for Alien 3, I'd hopped off the plane, I'd written up the story. Within a month, the owner of the studio had given us a release date. Now that's great for somebody who wants to keep working, but it's not great if you're being adventurous about a story and exploring it.
I always felt that Alien 3 was a movie that initially, as a studio, we set out to make a release date and not make a movie. And I think along the way that changed, but that really set us back.
In the meantime, they were over in London, and they were drawing up sets, and they were, we'd hired an art director, and we were, moving along.
My production designer, who I'd hired, was working away building sets in London. We had the Bond stage, which is the largest stage in London at that time.
The prime reason why I wanted to do this picture was, at that time, it was going to be Monks in Space, a Gothic movie, and I would really like very much to do that, because the opportunities of doing that sort of thing are few and far between.
I was involved right at the beginning with Vincent Ward, and his concept and visualization of the film was of a wooden planet floating in space, which was peopled by monks.
I had the world very strongly in my imagination, a wooden-clad environment with floors and floors, sometimes hundreds of meters high each floor, with each of their different parts of their monastic guilds in each of the floors.
We were all wondering how the hell we were going to do it and make it look as fantastic and as great as the previous two.
I mean, everyone has a series of visual images. It's like reading a book, isn't it? Certain things pop into your head, certainly. And that's depending upon the director's views, we combine. You know, it's sometimes directors have a clear vision exactly what they want to do. Others don't have very much idea at all. So it's a matter really of you know, cutting the cloth to suit whoever the individual happens to be, really.
And then things happened that brought around changes.
Even though I'd had a commitment from everybody that they loved this idea, the idea that I'd had, by the time I was heading over to England and getting close to hiring crew and so on, they said, well, we like 2 out of 3 of your ideas. And I went, yeah, well, we like the bit where the alien, where you're going to scare the bejesus out of people and you're going to have an alien in Sigourney. The bit about the world, well, one producer said, well, couldn't they just be convicts? And I went, oh. And then another producer said, who didn't necessarily agree with the first producer, but they kind of there seemed to be a trade-off going, said, well, why do we need this wooden environment anyway? Why don't we just have it a mining colony? So I went, guys, but we signed off on this. This is what you agreed to. And then, for a while they backed off on that. And then I got this kind of list of saying, we want the following changes. Meet tomorrow with one of the key senior executives at Fox. I was made to wait outside a door for an hour, like a school kid. And I was in a terrible mood, I have to say, by the time I'd waited for an hour. And I'd seen this list, which was very aggressive. It was, you do, you obey. So I tried to talk my way around it and was completely unsuccessful. It was told, do it or be fired. First I said, you know what, I'd rather be fired.
We started out with a director who is a tremendous visualist in his own right. I think one of the great things that both Ridley Scott and James Cameron did on the first 2 Aliens is create dynamic visual worlds, but in an action-packed commercial environment. And I think the first director sort of was going away from that.
By this stage, because the original Alien and Aliens had become very successful, it had a different meaning than the first Alien had, which was relatively low budget, relatively unknown star, not too much was at risk. Now everything was at risk. This was the franchise, and this was what was going to keep the studio going, this one film. So they look at me and they go, well, this guy from New Zealand, he's got this kind of wild idea, he's made these independent films. I don't know, do we trust him or not? So there became a lot of cooks involved, in the making of this broth. So the whole thing became shaky with my star, and I love working with actors, with my producers wanting something a lot safer, with a release date looming. It was like being on a platform and watching all the things crumble below you, and frankly trying to do this dance to kind of keep everything together.
The reasons he departed were many and varied.
My line producer, who was fantastic, and he warned me one day. He said, your assistant, the assistant that the studio organised for you. And I went, yes, tall, beautiful, yes, love her, fantastic. He goes, she's phoning in every night to the studio. And your production designer gets phone calls every night from the studio behind your back. He said, you're aware of this, aren't you? I went, yeah, sure. So I'd said to my studio exec, look, I need another assistant, I need something, she's overqualified. And it's amazing. In the end, it only takes one personal relationship. If there's mixed agendas in that kind of highly politically charged situation, that can undermine everything.
So then Fincher was suggested by the studio.
I never met the director that took over for me. I think David's very talented. I thought he had an impossible task ahead of him to take over a story that had been kind of gutted and try and then turn it into something else with people writing pages for you as you're on the set.
I didn't envy David because it's sometimes when you go through a long development process and there are lots of people involved, it can really get you in a situation where it's very hard to still find your vision and be able to do what you really set out to do in the first place.